rink. This would be the 30% design to take us through land use. The committee had a list of replacement goals that they put out onto the street for a bid. We went through an RFQL process where 19 different architects that responded interested in design, and that was shortlisted to 5. On the 26th of September, we had a meeting and 5 of the applicants made their presentations. This is all done through purchasing, and we were able to ascertain a positioning based on the scoring system of an architect that the committee's interested in, and the amount of money they wanted for both the 30% and then further down the road pretty much matches our budget. So we would like to go to contract or start the contract and start that design process through the release of these funds, through the request of the release of these funds.
Thank you, Al. Joe, do you have anything to add here?
Me? No, I don't.
Thank you. So do we have any questions? Jeff raised his hand.
Unmute, Jeff.
Jeff, you're muted. Jeff, you're muted.
Sorry. I certainly support this release. I just have a couple of requests maybe for the paperwork when it comes to the full BET, if you don't mind. On the attached explanation, highlighted at the end is bright yellow on ours, that there's 2 attachments. One's an aerial photo, I guess. The other is a topographical. I don't think there's anything very important about it, but I don't like having attachments noted to me which weren't actually included in the package, or at least I wasn't able to download that. I wonder if that could be provided to us. Secondly,
Jeff, I don't even know why those were there. All I thought I was attaching was Bill Drake's letter, replacement goals, and a study that KG&D did for Parks and Rec. Maybe those site plans were part of that attachment. I don't know.
By giving us the first attachment, the thing that talks about building requirements, which I'm sure was the work that the committee had done to lay out the project to bidders and the like. The only other thing, Alan, I'd be grateful for is in your verbal comments, you said that the purpose of the release of these funds is to do the design work to bring it to the 30% that you need for land use.
Right.
Could you please just amend the first page to say that, so that it's clear what the funds are being released for and that they wouldn't be spent for something else beyond that?
So in the first paragraph, it says Department of Public Works is requesting the release of funds to perform architectural and engineering services to gain.
No, where are you reading from?
The subject release paperwork that I put in.
Maybe there's something that I don't have. I have the document called Building Requirements, which gives a very nice detailed listing of all the elements and how the design is to be done.
Oh, that's an attachment, Jeff. I'm reading right from the release paperwork.
Maybe I'm missing a page, and maybe I'm the only one missing that page.
I don't have it either, Jeff.
There might be the page you're referring to didn't go out on the package. If that's on another sheet, if you just would provide that sheet to for the full BET, that would satisfy me.
Roland, do you have it? Because I'll send it out right now.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That'd be great.
That would be helpful.
It needs to go, of course, into the pack. I don't know who I'm saying this to exactly. Elaine, if you're listening, it needs to go out in the package that goes to the full BET on this item.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Alan. So it's just a mishap. There was a page that was missing.
Okay.
Thank you. That's all I have. I certainly support this. And thank
So,
you.
Al, can I just stop here? Alan, would you just give us 3 or 4 highlights from that memo, so that, because we don't have it at this point?
So the way it was written is that it's a double release, so it's asking for the release of both account numbers. So we explain each one, and the first line says the reference account was funded in the FY 1920 budget for $250 to begin the design process of replacing the existing skating rink facility. The Department of Public Works is requesting the release of funds to perform architectural and engineering services to gain MI and land use approvals. It talks about how we went through the process of KG&D doing an evaluation study. And then the second release basically repeats that same comment. We're asking for a release of funds to perform our A&E services to gain MI and land use. And then on the back side, the RFP was issued and asked each architect to provide pricing for 3 basic components of design: the 30% design, which talks about getting through inland wetlands planning and zoning, architectural review, the various commissions, which approximately is 30% of the design phase. 100% design completion, which is the construction documents, and a demolition package for the existing building. So those were the 3 components we asked all the architects to bid on. And we haven't spoken to the award-winning architect yet. So all I could tell you is that the prices fell between 1.4 million and 1.220 million. So that's where we're at.
Thank you, Al. Deborah?
So my question is more, so you get this money and then, you go through your approval process and you're kind of moving this thing along. I'm just trying to understand next steps in terms of, it looked like there was a page that talked about a range of potential outcomes for the building. And one being smaller, one being a bigger. And so my sense is, before you commit to what you're going to build on the space, you would, that hasn't been approved yet, I guess, from a capital perspective, but you'd have to come back to us for us to understand what it is that you intend to build on the site. Is that correct?
No, actually, so you're reading from the KG&D evaluation report. So based on that evaluation report, the committee created a list of replacement goals. They're called committee replacement goals for the Dorothy Hamill rink, and that was part of the attachment. So that's the list of things that the architects designed to.
And so what is that expected cost supposed to be versus what we originally thought we were going to spend on the building?
So the KG&D report was, number one, to look at the existing building and see if it was worthwhile to develop it or renovate it to meet the goals. And they wanted, in that report, it was in the $16 million range. And then based on that, how would they compare that to building a new building, which was a comparable $16 million? So with that, the committee said thank you to KG&D, and then used the basis of that report and said, okay, these are the things that we need to put in the building. And there was some give and take, and they worked it down to that list of replacement goals.
So roughly, the building that is expected to be built is a demolition rebuild in the $16 million range, that what we were originally thinking that we would spend?
At this moment in time, that's all I have to go on. Yes.
Okay, that's helpful. I'm trying to understand if are we deviating from sort of our expectation?
No, and the other thing the committee wanted to do is not lose a year of ice time. And Joe will jump in here in a minute if I say something wrong, but there's a concern from Parks and Rec that if we shut the building down and demolish the building before the new rink is open, we will start losing the people that rent the rink from us, the long-term rentals. And to avoid that, the plan is set so that the new rink would be constructed while the old rink remains in operation. And then once the new rink is opened, the old one will be demolished.
Thank you.
In fairness, I think the KG&D thing, if you take a look at the last page of it, the 60 million was actually 60,970,000. So it's actually kind of 17 million, I think, was the number that KG&D was working with. It looks to me like the committee was working with a slightly different figure. And Alan, I may be wrong about this. I'm old and my recollections are no longer reliable. Probably weren't reliable before. But when we were talking nominally about this project, before anybody had any clear ideas what we were talking about doing, I think the general concept that was being tossed around was that we were looking to build a building at about 15 million. Do I have that right? Or am I just wrong on that?
No, I think at one point we talked about taking the existing building and try to alter it in some way to meet code, because the building now is grandfathered into a lot of codes, and the minute you start touching it, we're going to have to bring everything up to code. And one of the big items here is with the existing building, the rink that's down now, the refrigeration piping is nearing 50 years old. And every year when we start it up, there's always a fear. In fact, we went through this last year. There's a fear that it's going to leak and we can't get to that pipe. So we would have to take up the rink surface, which is a concrete surface, remove all the piping. And the rink is not designed to any kind of regulation size. So one of the first things the committee did was establish that the rink should be extended by 15 feet to make it a regulation NHL size rink, so that the high schools could play and stuff. But once you start expanding the rink, you need to start expanding the south end of the building where all the mechanicals are. A big demand is for a team play is with showers and dressing rooms and changing rooms, which we cannot support in the existing building. And that's why in the KG&D report, to get all that stuff in, they kept not only putting additions on for mechanical and electrical space, but to also expand the building in width to account for team rooms and locker rooms more than they have today. And the building is very not friendly to people. And that's where you not only had code issues to resolve and rink issues resolved, but now you throw the programming and the prices kept building up. And it became very evident that the existing building couldn't support that.
Yeah, I think if anything, you've been generous to the existing building. As we've listened to
Thank you.
Joe over the years, I think that the problems probably could be more dramatically expressed than that. Can I ask a couple of questions on the KG&D pricing alternatives? On the last page, over and above the 16.9, almost 17 million, there's a reference to preferred options and to secondary options. And on the preceding page, those options are listed out. And those figures are dramatically higher.
Right.
If you built the building with all of the bells and whistles, I don't mean to use words that will corrupt thinking on this building later on, but all of these options at 31 going on $32 million is a lot bigger project. I just want to be fair to people who are approving things. Is there an expectation that we would be doing this work and then in a few years we'll be coming back and wanting to be adding these bells and whistles and the buildings in fact being built in the anticipation of adding these bells and whistles? Because if so, we need to be a little more frank with the taxpayers, I think.
The first thing the biggest bell and whistle in there is a second rink. And the committee did not agree to a second rink. Their replacement goal was a single skating surface. So the big thing in the KG&D report is if they went to a second rink. There was some exploration of, do you keep the existing building and add another building onto it so that you'd end up with two ice surfaces? But the committee decided not to go that route. That's why it fell back into that $16 million range.
But it also has reference to two private locker rooms and this type of thing. Would it be fair that we're being asked to approve the $16.9 million project and that there really is honestly not an expectation that we're going to be looking to do the extra work in the upcoming years? Or is the opposite case?
So what they did approve was so what we were able to do was to try to think through this. So if they have two, like say high school games back to back, they have 4 locker rooms that share 2 bathroom facilities. The first 2 teams that are playing each other, one would be in locker room 4 and one would be locker room 2, and they'd be separated. So there'd be no animosity between the 2 teams. That never happens. And then as the second game approaches, those people would fill in 2 and 3, which also would be separated. And they would use the central bathrooms for 1 and 2 and 2 and 3. So they were thinking in those, instead of having private showers and toilets for every locker room, there was a combination and sharing mechanism. And then now with with some of the new regulations, we have to worry about, you still have female and male, but they can share the locker room, but then there's some locker rooms, some male or female teams would need their own private. So a 5th locker room, a smaller one, was relegated to just to cover teams that did not want to have cross-gender mix in the restrooms or in the shower rooms. And then there was a small non-showered area for officials, and that was it. So everything that they thought about in the KG&D report was commented on, and basically the biggest issue that was in the KG&D report is from the committee was that they did not want to lose a year of ice time. So the plan and the goals were all geared around not losing that year of ice time.
And I'm sympathetic to that, but I didn't quite get an answer to my question. I'd like to get to the point where we have an understanding with each other that if you come back to us in 6 years and want to build additional locker rooms or another slab of ice or something, I can fairly look back at Alan Manelli or your successor or whatever, Alan, at that point and say, when we approved this, we had an understanding with each other that you wouldn't be coming back for the enhancements. Or conversely, if the thought is, we're going to do this now, we're going to see how the town finances are, see what the competing needs are, but actually we are thinking that we may be coming back to it at a later time for the improved work. Maybe we ought to have that conversation now so we understand where we are with all that.
Jeff, I think the one issue is we're dealing with that site right now, which is a baseball field and a parking lot and the skating rink. And there's only so much stuff that you could put on that site. So I can't tell you what's going to happen 6 years from now or 10 years or 20 years from now. But one of those things, if you were going to put a second ice surface up there, you would have to get rid of the baseball field, which would be a whole nother building, which I can't see that happening, but crazier things have happened. But
So to me,
I don't see that building. The building is going to be put in such a position that it can't be expanded on.
That's almost an answer. I'm going to take that.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
and I was trying to get to the same thing as Jeff, and I just tried to make sure that we have an expectation of what this is going to cost. And so, maybe 5 years plus down the line, you decide to change it, but there's no immediate near term 2 to 3 year plan to do anything beyond what's there. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay. Jeff, is that a little?
Oh, you put it way better than I did.
No. So, and then I think what
Me
just
too.
what might also be helpful, if you wouldn't mind, for the full BET on Monday, is because I was trying to look on the capital sheets online. And it's very hard because I don't have my hard copies with me here. If you could just kind of put maybe like what the original timing and estimate was in the capital plan for last year of what the dollar amounts were versus where you think we'll end up. I think it would just be helpful just to see it on one piece of paper, not just kind of where we thought we were going to be and where now with more clarity where we'll be.
So I have a pretty clear recollection that in the budget that was approved by the budget committee 6 months ago, the capital funding for this was in the budget. And at the full BET in our late April meeting that I won't try and describe in any way,
Jeff?
it was reduced. I'm not going there. It was reduced down to the figure that you see here, the 250,000, which together with the year earlier funding So for your
Other way around. It was, we put it in for over $1 million to complete the 100% design, and it was cut to 150.
But I'm
Okay.
not asking about that part. I remember that part. I was part of
Okay.
that. I'm asking about the next year part, like, right? So, so with the committee at the time was comfortable that this was the right amount that would get you to where you needed to be for this fiscal year. So I'm talking out the later years. If you could just clarify what we thought was in the later year versus what is that new number, and just making sure there's not a significant variation. That's what I'm trying to get to.
Okay.
Leslie, do you have any questions?
I do. I want to first, because my guess is it sounded like Al had put it on the page of this document that we didn't get. The two conditions that we're being asked to release, the first one on the fiscal 20 number is for a review and acceptance of the project scope and feasibility. And the second 150,000 was confirm the need for additional funds for the A&E and to complete the land use appropriation. So our action today is approving the scope of this project as it goes forward, as it's represented in the documents that we have. And I just want to make sure all my colleagues understand that. When it comes to the understanding of the finances of additional funds, and I don't know if we got the explanation of what your current available balance is. I looked at the open capital appropriations that I have from a little while ago, and I see that this has dropped off. So it looks like you've spent everything that you have. No. Okay. Can you tell me where you are, exactly what you have available and what you need to commit to?
What I need to commit to is, apparently we did some soil testing out there, because that's on top of everybody's mind. And I was able to pay for that, and somehow it got charged against this and was paid. So I know there was an expenditure against the 250. We do pay the architects to make their presentation, and I owe 20,000 there. And then the 30% design, we'll probably, of the $400,000 between those things that I just talked about, including the 30% design, we're going to consume pretty close to $350,000 to $360,000 of the $400,000 that's been the double appropriation. That'll allow me to, if there's any extras, or if I want to do additional testing on soils, or we might want to do some coring of the strata over there to find out where the ledge is. I know that sewers is a big concern, so that'll leave a $40,000 contingency to support the design. And then
And your contract with this architect is going to be a contingent one, because you don't have appropriation or authority to go above the 400. Is that right?
actually, let's just say that his 30% design is $300,000. That's as far as we go with him. I mean, if I needed to do something to support his work, like do additional ground testing or something, I could handle that through the money that you're going to release. But we could not go any farther on the design until we come back to you. Actually, it's going to be in this year's budget, is to replace the money that was cut last year, so that next summer, hopefully when this is all done and we're going to the next phase, which is the construction documents, we could engage that portion of the contract.
But the contract that you have with that architect
It's a contingent one.
is a contingent one. So it's an ad alternate to do the
Yep.
CD documents, and that'll be only exercised if you get the funding and if you're happy with the work in the first 30%.
Yep.
But just to ask question for Roland, if you have available, so that's consistent in terms of there's no available funds left for this project or de minimis of open appropriations. And I'll let Roland look that up. I didn't ask that question in advance, but so I have, was this one of the projects, and this is a different, a little bit on a different note, but I know that public-private partnerships have been mentioned with a lot of these facility replacements? And is there something being pursued for this particular project?
Joe, you want to answer that one?
There's been some discussion with some outside groups to look at those partnerships. But as it's hard to do that unless we have something to show, which is we have a great outline here of the needs, or the wants, but we need the next step. So, but there have been some active discussions with the first selectman directly from a couple of groups, but nothing solid. I can tell you that.
Are you planning on phasing? You've got two large projects that you're looking at, Eastern Greenwich Civic Center and this one. Are you intending to kind of phase the progress on both of those projects so that they're not overlapping?
They're not going to they're going to overlap, but they're going to maybe overlap by a year or two. So we would probably be asking for the construction funds for Eastern this coming year. And the only thing we're asking for in the rink is to continue the design. And then the following year would be, depending on where we are with Hamel, we would be asking for the construction funds at that point.
Okay. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Deborah?
I'm sorry if I meant to ask this before. Maybe it's too soon, but with the new rink, do you have a sense of potential incremental revenues that you may get because of the new facility, and also how that might compare to? I saw somewhere that there may be some incremental cost to managing it. Do you have a sense, or is it just too far away at this point to have an estimate?
It's a little bit too early to kind of do that, but we do know that with having a new building, it'll be definitely more attractive to the user groups because our building is woefully, underrated as far as some of the rinks around the area. And so that should be an attraction. Also, we do know that we can probably charge more per hour for ice time because, rinks that are more modernized and have more features can command that type of hourly. And that's our biggest revenue draw there. And with this building, it gives us the option of going more seasonal or long-term. There's a whole discussion about whether a year-round opportunity is here that could be possibly developed. And because you just need to know what the other competing rinks are so that everybody's not oversaturating the market with ice during the summer, that it's the most expensive time to make ice and that cannot be sold. So, there are options here to move into that.
Thank you.
Can I ask one other question just again about the competitive marketplace? Because certainly, I think it's changed a little bit since we first started talking about this project. What was it, 30 years ago? No, maybe it was only a few years ago. Because the real cost in this project is basically upgrading the size of the rink, so it kind of requires new technology in a new building. And so that's what's driving the cost. Probably the number of team rooms and the other associated space, the 1,000 square foot meeting room, et cetera, it adds incrementally to the cost, but it's really just the basic ice that drives that cost. So from availability, I know that we've lost some groups from using our facility because of the condition of the rink. You still feel there is enough demand that we are not building an asset which oversaturates the market?
I don't think so. I think we're building a pretty standard rink. There aren't a lot of frills here. It's just, people originally in the initial discussion, when the committee started to meet, they were talking about a restaurant and, all of these other features that some of the private rinks had. They were talking about, when you were talking about locker rooms, they were talking about individual locker rooms for the high school team that was exclusive, those types of things. Everybody stepped way back from that. I think what we're building here is an up-to-date, modernized rink to a certain standard that playability with the ice slab. There aren't a whole lot of frills to this rink, but it'll be enough to bring us up to date and put us in the competitive market. Right now, just because of the lack of locker room situation, the lack of meeting space, the rink is a shorter slab than most standardized rinks that are out there. We can't command some of those other dollars that we should for rental space or ice space, those kind of things, because people just go where there's, they think. The other thing that we have that's really interesting is that we know we've lost some of those groups to Stanford organizations, Chelsea Piers, et cetera. And it was kind of interesting, the first initial conversation we had with one of our groups, which rented a lot of ice from Greenwich, that said that they were going to Chelsea Piers because they gave them a good time slot, and they also gave them a good price. That didn't happen the second year. The second year, they got a okay time slot, and they raised the price incrementally. And the interesting part about this, the parents really stepped in and said, I have to drive from Greenwich to Stamford, northbound on I-95, usually at the end of the day, which means that you're going to sit a 15-minute ride from here to exit 9. Now it becomes a 30-minute ride or 40-minute ride to exit 9. And it became an issue with the parents who said, this is crazy, and we did get a lot of that ice. They did come back and take a lot of ice time back from us, because just the parents alone said, we're spending unneeded times commuting back and forth to Stamford to get ice time when we have a rink right here in Greenwich. And even though it's not up to date and it doesn't meet the standards that a lot of the newer rinks do, we're spending too much time on the commute. And people, that was one of the most offensive things people found with moving their ice time to Stamford.
Okay, thank you.
So,
I would make a motion.
I see Al is just, I wanted to ask a couple of questions myself before we proceed here. Al, can you tell us the square footage of the existing rink? I think this package says that talking about the minimum size of a potential new rink, but I was wondering if you could give us the square foot of the existing rink, please.
Hold on. I just put it behind me. The existing rink is 31,375 square feet.
Compared to
Thank you,
40,
Al.
the new.
It says, yeah, minimum 40. Now, and has there been any, the feasibility study would normally not just be architectural, but you might have some other marketing information, like I think, what the market is like, what Leslie was talking about in writing. Was there anything like that done, any kind of study, benchmarking with other high schools? This is basically a town high school rink, I assume. Was any of that work done?
No.
I'm sorry?
No,
No. Okay.
because we don't know the reason for that is, as you've seen in KG&D's report, they're talking about, what Jeff brought up before, what was the $32 million solution, and there's two skating surfaces, and that evaluation really concentrated on the building aspect. What is the existing building? What can we do with that existing building? So that would be something that would have to be done as you formulate what the new building is going to look like.
Okay. And then also, Joe, I think this is more directed to Joe. Have you put together a staffing plan for this building? There's a lot of different rooms here and locker rooms and different rooms. So you have both a staffing for security and protection, and you also have the janitorial and, the increased building and what it would take. Have you put together an annual budget, comparable budget between what we have now and what this would be?
Well, first of all, as you know, right today, we have no full-time employees that operate the rink. It's all
Right.
done on a part-time recreation supervisors, and all the other employees there are part-time. So we would have to take a look at the design phase. And even though it's outlined here in some of these, major objects of what the wants are, to see how we would deal with the staffing patterns. I mean, obviously, it's a slightly larger building. It's going to operate approximately the same number of hours or maybe longer season. But at the end of the day, we would have to look at that and see, obviously we're recently trying to design buildings that are as maintenance friendly as possible. And when we looked at this building, we asked them for some information about the maintenance issue, not the custodial maintenance issue. And then we'd have to look at the staffing issue for oversight and supervision. As we go through the design phase, there's a bunch of things we can do to try to mitigate some of that. And depending on the types of surfaces, depending on accessibility to the building, where the entrance is, where the control points are, those types of things. And we would look at those as we go through the site development or the building development to try to minimize what the outcome would be. So we're not incrementally adding staff. Now, I can't sit here today and say that we're not going to add staff, but we would try to do that during the design phase. So I can't really completely answer your question. The only thing I can tell you is that we're very aware of it, and we will try to, during the design phase, look at all of those issues, like how people access the building, control points, with surfacing, how that's all done so that we can minimize the amount of staffing and custodial needs that we're going to have to keep this building in good shape. So, but I don't have the building to do that with yet.
Thank you. Because I mean, again, this building is approximately 33% larger than the existing building. So obviously staffing costs are something that, and operational costs are something that everyone is interested in.
Right. Okay.
So thank you for the additional information. Do I have a motion, or do we?
So I would move. I would move that on a completed application, meaning add the missing pieces, if you would, that we recommend to the full BET the release of both conditions, and that we do so calling this a routine item.
I'll second that motion.
I just wonder, and this really doesn't matter what we vote, whether it's routine or non-routine, I would just make the comment, since we are basically releasing it by approving the feasibility study and the program for the building, that may warrant it being a non-routine item. But I'll leave that to Mr. Mason.
Okay, so, but we're voting on it as a routine release of conditions for
Yep.
both conditions. So I wanted to add one point, which I did, I meant to add earlier. And then, if I just take the numbers that we've heard today, I think something up to, 16.9 for the building, 400,000 of this money that's been appropriated, and another, I guess, $1.4 million or so for the architect, or up to that. We're talking about something like 18.7 million in sum total. And that's normally how we would look at a project like this. So I just want to make that comment. So I'll call for a vote. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So that vote is going to be 3-0-1. I really felt that I'm going to abstain from releasing the conditions. I felt that additional information should have been brought to us in terms of feasibility. And I look forward to seeing Al's memo, which we'll have for next week, and the additional information that will come in that memo. I see Al's hand up. We normally don't.
Yeah, I was just, so in your inbox, I sent you the condition request. You should have it now. I think I know what happened. The KG&D report was so large that it had to go out in 2 emails, and it probably, if you didn't know that, it probably was a mess up in the printing, and that's why, Jeff, you probably got those unreadable attachments. So for Tuesday, and I'll get this to Roland, is the write-up you want me to take the write-up that I just sent you and add what we're going to be requesting in the next couple of years. So the additional design fee and what I think the building is going to cost. We'll probably put in the building at this point, what the building will cost. And then I think that's all you guys need. Leslie, is that correct?
Yes, unless I hear from Jeff, Deborah, Leslie, are you okay with that?
Just include the prior amounts too, so it's an all-in cost. So what's been incurred plus what you expect, so that it's the total cost for the facility, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Al, Joe, and I guess Amy was online. So now we're going to move.
I'm sorry, and if we don't want to move off this item, but the all-in cost that you have is for the construction of the new building. Is it also restoration of the field or the groundwork or the other site work that has to be done? It may include demolition, but is it an all-in cost that you're looking at?
Leslie, at this point, until I see what they come up with, I can't answer that question. I'm projecting a to be determined number, which you guys don't like, of $17 million for a building to be constructed, plus the architectural fees. At this point, I don't know. I mean,
So it doesn't include it.
right now with Eastern Greenwich Civic Center, what I thought the building was, and as I go through the different planning and zoning and the architectural review committee and everything, those numbers are changing as people are asking for stuff to be accommodated in these buildings.
Right. This particular one, though, you have a side issue, right? You're anticipating it to be built on a new location and then afterwards demoing and restoring the old.
That's part of the inclusion. Yeah. That'll be in the inclusion.
Is that's in the 17 million?
Mm-hmm.
Rough estimate. We know it's not.
Rough estimate. We're going to take the existing building site and make it a parking lot. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
But,
Sorry.
the paperwork doesn't suggest that. I mean, the terrific detail you gave us, thank you very much. The parameters of what you'll be looking for on a facility doesn't list any of the demo work or site work. And maybe I'm mistaken, but I have a feeling that the KG&D paperwork didn't include site work either.
Actually, what you're going to find out is what we're planning on is in the attachment that says committee replacement goals.
All right, then I won't get out ahead of it.
Okay.
If we have questions, we'll raise it with you, and somebody will let you know, Alan, if you don't mind, whether or not this is going to change to a non-routine item, which means that we'd be grateful if there could be some attendance from you or somebody who's able to answer some questions.
Yeah, I'm planning on it.
There's 8 other BET people, you realize.
Thank you, Alan and Joe.
I thought there was you 4. Okay.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
Appreciate your help here. We have an item for the police department, PD2, that arrived too late to be on the agenda. Is there a motion to put PD2, a port security grant of $181,043 onto the agenda?
I would move that it be added to the agenda. It requires the 2/3 vote.
I will second.
So Jeff moved and Jeff Raymer moved and Leslie Moriarty seconded. I've been asked to make sure we get this on the record. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So that vote is unanimous, all 4 members, 400. So do we have someone from the police department? We have with us Jenny, Jim Heavey, and Bob Berry from the police department. Could you please bring them up for this particular item, please?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So we have here a port security grant. I don't know, Chief, are you going to describe this or?
Sure, I can. First of all,
and can you describe what it's going to be used for and so forth and so on? And
okay.
Just
So
thank you.
in the materials you received, it goes into rather extensive detail for the items that the port security grant. As all of you know, or most of you should know, that we have a public safety vessel 139 that is a regional asset, as well as 2 police vessels that respond also with mutual aid. And over the last few years, we've applied successfully for federal grants to maintain and enhance that capability, both for the town of Greenwich and for the region. So Captain Bonnie has done a lion's share of the work in applying for this grant, and it was approved by Homeland Security recently. So one of the requirements of that is a match and of 25%. But what we do is we do get credit in kind for maintaining this asset. So we've covered all of that with the exception of $11,200. What's included in this is a number of items, including a UAV, unmanned aerial vehicle that would be used for search and rescue, event protection, infrastructure inspection, and technical assistance, crime apprehension. And then that might be the only fancy piece of the equipment. The rest gets to batteries, deck lighting, some pumps, and this would be for Police Boat 124, and then for Police Boat 139, it's batteries, deck lighting, a pump, binoculars. Same thing with some of the other things, some minor repairs like welding and the labor for the installation of some of this equipment. Additionally, some safety equipment, night vision helmets, life jackets, and equipment that will enhance our ability to respond and make it safer for the officers. So subject to your questions, and I apologize, I'm in the parking lot of the Bethel Police Department. I am at the Fairfield County Chiefs meeting, preparing for the next few weeks with different things occurring, including the election. So, but I'm out in the parking lot, and you have my undivided attention now.
So I will ask the first question. You talked about the detail. We did not receive any detail with this. What is attached to the back of this is the budget committee questions that were asked about the COVID. So it sounds like perhaps that was attached rather than the actual details of this particular application.
I think I can only say that I miss some of your recently retired staff and their accuracy at getting these things to the proper people at the proper time. I know there was a mention that it was submitted late, but we do have a receipt of it being received on September 25th. So I apologize for that. We can immediately probably get that shared. Unfortunately, I literally am in the parking lot of the Bethel PD, so I can't share my screen with the documents, but
if you would just forward that to Roland. Roland has actually been doing a superb job of.
I do believe that he should have that. We brought this up again Friday because we weren't on the agenda, and we resent that. So I'll have Ally resend that to the entire BET and Roland.
Yeah, I mean our agenda was set because of yesterday being a holiday. We had to get it posted before 11 o'clock on Friday. So that's
sure. Okay.
So do we have any questions on this?
So there was a boat on fire in the water. Yes. So was it this vessel that actually helped rescue that boat?
Well, unfortunately, it was more a recovery mission. However, I think it was a good example of the fire department and the police department working together to respond to this type of an incident. The 139 actually responded to the Stanford boat fire as well to assist them last week. So it's just a good example of the vessel and its capabilities. We had a lieutenant and 3 firefighters on board 139. We had 4 firefighters on 124, in addition to our crews who are specially trained in operating the vessel under those emergent circumstances. And both crews and both boats performed very well.
Great. Thank you. Okay. I have no further questions.
I just wanted to ask, you're using some money from the Federal Asset Forfeiture Fund. I know that you've used that, I believe, for other grants, but do you have, and if you don't have that information now, you can forward it, what the size of that amount the forfeiture fund is, and what do you typically use it for? Is this 11,000 displacing some other use you would have for those funds?
So it's very restrictive fund. It's about $160,000 prior to this 11,000 withdrawal. We cannot use it to supplant any budgetary or operational item per se, but for certain things like this, it is acceptable use. I use it very sparingly. I think I've probably used it only a handful of times in the 9 years I've been chief. But it is a pot of money that hasn't really been refilled in many years. Most of the asset forfeiture was from our drug asset forfeiture. You know, when there's no identifiable victim, that the funds are often divvied up to the agencies that assisted on the state or federal level. And I actually think that the amount in that asset forfeiture is probably close to about 190,000. But like I said, we haven't gotten any income from that asset forfeiture fund in some time.
And this may be more of a question for Roland, or just how we present this, because you're indicating that 34,000 will be absorbed by the police department budget over the next 3 years, so 11,000 a year.
Well, that's
no,
in
less-
kind services. That's not
Right.
an actual
Okay.
cost. What it is we log all of the maintenance that we perform to maintain the regional asset. So every time they do an oil change or do maintenance on 139, we get a credit, which would be an in-kind service to maintaining that vessel's readiness for response to the region.
I see. So I guess there is no financial recognition of that we need to put on this cover sheet. It's sort of an imbalance here that we have a grant that we're accepting that's less than the amount that we're receiving in cash. Okay. No other questions?
Jeff, are you okay?
Yeah, I mean, I had the same problem that I have 147 on the from, 140 some odd from the from, and 181 on the to. And it's being made up by the 34,061 divided into thirds, which is going to be funded out of future appropriations. The actual grant that we're accepting then isn't actually 181. Isn't the grant just 75% of that? Do I have that right?
It's a little bit of a misnomer the way it's written. The total project is 181,000. The grant
Right.
from the federal government is 135,000, but we're required to put up 25% toward that total project amount.
So,
I'll be able to send this to you shortly, but this is the actual sheet from the Homeland Security that kind of enumerates what Deputy Chief Barry just said.
yeah, I just want Roland to be satisfied with this. It's really a Roland question. Should we not be accepting a grant at the 135,782, and in addition, either on the same sheet or a separate sheet, be making an application of funds out of the asset forfeiture thing? Wouldn't that be how, from a journaling standpoint, it should go?
Well, I think they're just getting credit for expenses in their normal operations. It's like the chief said, we maintain the boat, that counts as a credit toward this amount, and that is in their normal budget. I mean, we could maybe
Well, it's
maybe
not
we
quite- the grant
get
that we're-
highlighted on the application here to say we get credit for expenses in the normal course of business that we do to maintain those vessels.
Yeah, as Officer Barry pointed out, the actual grant that we're accepting is 135,782. So I don't know that I want a blue sheet here that talks about our acceptance of a grant at 181,043. There's no grant in that amount that we're accepting. We're accepting 135,782, and there's a condition on it. The condition on it is that we have to come up with some other money, and that some other money has two different categories of source. One is going to be some funds out of asset forfeiture, a quarter of it, and the other 3/4 of it is going to be something where that tricky chief of ours is going to find the funds out of the hidden money that he doesn't tell us about in the next 3 budget years.
I've learned from the best, Budget Committee.
And you do it well. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding about all of it, Chief. Actually, you do a great job, and I'm very appreciative. Roland, from a standpoint of the blue sheet that's white, actually, read correctly, could you just take that in hand you do this so much better than I do. Could you just restructure that so it
Wait,
reads?
we'll show in terms of the sources of funds, we'll add the other line on there so that it adds up to 181.
Okay, whatever. Just satisfy yourself and do that together with Officer Barry, and I'm sure we'll be great.
Okay.
Thank you. I don't mean to trouble you over technicalities.
No problem.
Okay, so,
That's before us. The motion that you're going to be asking for is a motion to accept the grant and to apply asset forfeiture funds, right? I would make that motion. I would
Okay,
make that, recommend to the BET that motion.
so Jeff has made the motion
And I'll second it.
and Deborah Hess has seconded. And those in favor?
Aye.
So all are in favor, 4-0-0. So we thank you.
How do you want to deal with the issue of routine or non-routine? Whatever you want is fine with me.
Well, Jeff, you made the motion.
I mean, I would normally have said non-routine just because it relies on some pieces of paper that we haven't seen. I just don't want to condemn the chief and Officer Barry to have to be online with us on Monday evening unnecessarily. Maybe we could mark it non-routine. I'm sorry, mark it routine for the moment. And in the meantime, we'll get that paperwork from the chief. And if somebody has a problem with that, they can make a request that it be marked routine, and we'll notify the chief if he please save some time for us on Monday. Does that work?
Deborah,
I'm
Deborah,
fine.
you seconded.
Yeah, I agree. That's fine.
And I'll
Okay.
remain available if anybody has, we should be able to get you some, we'll get you all these documents before close of business today. And then I'll be available if somebody has a question. Not like 40 or 50 questions, but I'd be available for questions if you have them.
Okay, we'll pay you extra after the first 5. How's that?
Yeah,
Okay.
Thank you so much, and good luck with your meeting.
good deal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so, so now we have gotten to the point of, we sort of reversed a couple of things here. We're gonna do new business first, discussion of the economic conditions, because I thought that would be useful background before our penultimate item here. So, Roland, do you want to walk us through our economic report here? I think we have 1 or 2 expanded reports, at the
Right.
request of
So-
committees, and then I might actually, ask for some other support here.
So on the first page, the 3 items we normally talk about, conveyances is really doing well. And I've heard that October is going to be another very, very big month for conveyance taxes. Building permits are down from the last few years. There's not as much activity. And interest, we know what that story is. And we're starting to get a more normal item for tipping fees, which kind of lags a month. On the
Okay.
next page,
We don't have September for tipping fees, eh?
yes, that's true. Because the bills actually go out in the month, and then we receive the cash the following month. The next one is a more detailed revenue summary comparing the first 3 months of this fiscal year to last year. And one of the biggest differences, of course, is the real estate taxes, which is behind last year of almost $8 million. However, in the first 10 days or 9 days of October, we collected almost the entire $8 million. So as of the end of midway through October, we had caught up on the real estate taxes. So some of the people that were deferred did not get it in until sometime in October. And the other area that's
Roland, may I just interrupt you there? Do you know whether that was also true on motor vehicle taxes? Because
all 3 of them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And one of the other areas, if we get into Parks and Recreation, You can see that some of the revenues are down compared to last year, just across the board. Beach admissions, beach parking, of course. And that's, you can see kind of the impact of COVID. The one area in Parks and Rec that is higher than last year are the beach card memberships, because the people did not buy them in May and June when they usually do to get ready for the season. They bought them over the summer, which is on the last page of those revenues.
But it's fair to say that the bottom line revenue, year over year, we were down 10.6 million. But if you remove the taxes that were delayed, that you said have come in, those totaled 8.7 million. I may be missing one category. So we're down less than 2 million. We're about down a little less than 2 million year over year. And just as we go into expenses, that's a number to remember.
So can I ask a question on the tipping fees? We had targeted tipping fee income, I thought, at about 35. What we targeted? I'm trying to remember what we had targeted at. These 2 months, they're probably not very typical. I'm looking at how much less July was than August. People may have been slow coming in to purchase their passes. I don't know if they were even on sale for the full month of July.
July was quite limited. There was a little bit of on-site pay in person up there. Most of it was billed out at the end of the month, and we don't recognize the billings until we get the cash in. So going forward, we should be on a more regular cycle, and we should be seeing that amount every month. But July is a lag.
The larger, this is a question, not a statement. The larger revenue doesn't come from the selling those pink passes to the residents. It comes from the haulers paying the tipping fee.
Yes.
Do I correctly?
Right. If you look at the tipping fees are in Department 321, and the residential permit fees are $34,500.
Oh. Okay. All right. So maybe actually on the tipping fees issue, we shouldn't not extrapolate any conclusions for a few months yet and take a look back.
That's fair. Yeah.
Right, and see what it looks like. Don't you think by that time?
Yes.
Okay. You explained a bit, and maybe I wasn't listening carefully enough. On the real estate taxes, when we include the taxes that were paid in a rush just before the October 2nd deadline, I may have that date wrong, but I think that was the last day in which to pay. Are we on the real estate taxes paid to a very high percentage? 99% or in some number like that, or even more than 100%? Do you know?
I don't know offhand what that percentage is, but I just know that we're by mid-October we were equal to last year.
Okay.
So Jeff, I think that's a good point, and maybe we could ask our tax collector, Roland, if she could just, submit a report next month when we look at economic conditions,
Okay.
just so we get a feel for the collections and what Jeff is talking about, and get a better feel. We may want to slip that, depending on the timing, into December, but should be done, because I think what we want to see is October, basically, to answer the question, because some of these dates were in early October, Jeff.
Yes.
Okay. So I think getting a report and follow up on that point would be helpful. Roland, should we move on to our run rate on the departments?
Right, on the expenses. One of the biggest difference in spending is at the Board of Education, and that's almost all on instruction. And that represents, the savings there represent savings in supplies, basically it's supplies and things like that, that are lower for these 3 months because of the Board of Ed using last year's money and purchasing these supply items in the month of June. And that's the biggest variance.
Do we have the same number of pay periods in both?
We did,
We do.
yeah.
So to parallel your statement on the revenues, Leslie, right now, our run rate is that we're spending at a rate of 5.4 million less than the similar period versus the revenues. So we'll just keep on looking at that, and these are unusual
Leslie,
periods.
just on one difference, or a couple. The employee benefits, that continues to be a timing difference. And transfer from other funds, that is the $4 million that the contribution to the capital fund went down by $4 million in the 2021 budget compared to 1920. And that's going to stay that way for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
It's not really lower spending.
We may want to do a subtotal before that transfer line, if that's
Okay.
what it is, so we can really see
Yeah.
what the operations impact is.
So,
So
can I, may I? I'm sorry. So I just think, Roland, I think what would be helpful is in revenues, when you look year over year, if it goes up or down, like it's going down, it's a negative number, 10 million. But when you go to expenses, if expenses go down, it's a positive number. Could you almost switch the signs, because it's confusing, because expenses going down is a different meaning than revenues going down. I just think that the signs makes it, I don't know, for me, it just kind of makes it hard to read, because expenses are actually down, but it shows a positive number.
Yeah. Okay.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
The old whether it's the variable versus positive or negative.
It's the accountant / CFO in me. I'm sorry, I can't help it.
So Roland, any comments on the other funds, or not necessary?
No.
Okay. So Pete, we have in here our, the benchmarking that came in on the pension peers from the CAFA report. You want to just run down this quickly? I asked the question at the pension board July meeting, I believe, and this is the benchmarking that was prepared by Greg Stump on terms of our return assumption. You want to this report is in here, and Greg chose to benchmark against 10 communities in Connecticut.
Okay, can a document be shared?
Sure. Roland, can you put the document up, please?
Sure.
The retirement board at the July meeting had a presentation from the actuary, Boomershine Consultant, led by their actuary, Greg Stump, who's been with us a number of years. The retirement board indicated that they want to drop the assumed rate of return from 6.5, the current rate, to 6.25 this year and 6 next year. The actuary reports are done as of July 1st of each year. At the request of Leslie, Greg went out and looked at 9 other towns. I don't believe the document's being shown, correct?
No, not yet.
So basically, it shows with the exception of Westport, we're way below the other 8 towns. They range from, excluding Westport. Here it is. They're in the high 6s to low 7s. What really jumps out is their funding ratios are much higher than ours. However, that's where you have the column funded percent starts at 70-80. However, there's an inverse relationship here. If you have a higher return assumption, it automatically increases the funding percentage. So this is a little bit deceiving as far as the funding column. But what's most important, and I think the intent from Leslie, is that when we go to 6, 2, 5, and 6, relative to our peers, if you want to call most of these towns our peers, we will be the lowest a year from now as far as the return assumption. What does that mean?
Westport.
That means that the year, it was formerly called the annual required contribution, the ARC. It's the actuarially determined employee contribution now. We're going to go from 26.1 million to somewhere between 30 million and 32 million. And Leslie's point is a good one. It's a segue because it's one of the budget drivers when you talk about the budget guidelines in the mill rate page. It's one of the largest budget drivers as far as the fixed charge increases. So I think basically the document's self-explanatory, but it's very informative if you want to connect this with the increase in the ADEC, the annual contribution.
The only thing, but by the way, look at Westport, 98% at a return assumption of 6 1/8, if all those figures are correct. That's pretty impressive. I wonder how hard it would be to make a sub-calculation under Greenwich that if we shifted to 6 1/4, our funding ratio would be this. If our return assumption was at 6 3/4, our funding would be that percentage, et cetera. If we had the Greenwich figure at a variety of return assumptions that match up with our neighbors, we'd be able to make a comparison of what are we doing compared to Fairfield, for example. Fairfield's at 86%, but a return assumption of 7%. If we had 7%, we might be higher than 86%. We might be at 90 or 95% for all I know. It would be interesting just to see, if we look at this again in a future time, it might be interesting to see those translators added as a subpoint.
Jeff, we do that. That is in the CAFR. If in the CAFR, we take the 6.5 and we show what the liability would be at 1% higher and lower, 550 and 750. What I can do is after the meeting, I could take that page out and scan it and send it to the BET. We already do that, and you could probably do the math as far as numbers in between.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Pete. I wasn't looking for a task for you. I was only thinking in the future, if we look at it again at a future point, maybe that might be an interesting thing to have. That's all.
Okay.
So Jeff, in addition, or to the whole committee, Deborah and Leslie too, in addition to this, I'd asked at that meeting if Greg could create, this kind of report also for other assumptions that are made, such as the amortization. Once again, our assumption is, or could be, very conservative relative to our peers. I guess because this information was the most accessible and easiest for him, he only did the one factor. But there are several other decisions that are made, and each of them are on the conservative side. I will add that at that meeting, the numbers that Greg used actually show a contribution increase of total contribution of $31.8 million to the retirement fund. And that would be a 22% increase. So that's what caught my eye in today's environment with our, when we have so many unknowns, let's just call it that. So let's move on if we can. I think one of the things that happened at our last meeting, and again, within our economic report, my colleagues, we had a discussion on the questions about how COVID has impacted department operations. And we suggested that maybe they should respond. There was a discussion, lively discussion. One way perhaps was to go out in the operating plans and have the departments respond that way. two of our committee members, Jeff Raymer and Deborah Hess, put together questions individually structured for 5 departments. And they were sent out, I guess, now not quite 2 weeks ago, I guess, when I got the questions in. And our 5 departments responded, within the time frame. Those department questions are included. Their responses are included here. And quite frankly, I thank Jeff and Deborah very much. I found that it was fascinating to get their responses. And we did say, respond at a high level, and that we may ask similar questions in the February budget cycle. And they did. And quite frankly, my guess is by the February budget cycle, they would have forgotten some of these things. So I just, I found the information useful. I found the work that the departments are doing and their response to this pandemic really something to be commended upon. But we would not have done this without the discussion and follow-up by Jeff and Deborah. So I thank you.
We voted as a committee.
Have any
to ask
comments
the
here?
question.
I'm sorry, Jeff,
We had voted as a committee to ask those questions, as you
we
recall.
voted as a committee, absolutely, but you followed up and the departments all followed up and yes, we voted as a committee. There's no question about that. I'm sorry if I didn't make that point clear.
No,
I was just giving you guys credit.
Okay, no, thank you.
Does anyone have any questions or comment on any of these? Or we move on?
I think the content of some of them will come up in the conversation that we're just about to have regarding guidelines. So I'm going to save my comment on the submissions that we received from some of the departments and take them up in the context of guidelines, if that's all right.
Does anyone else have any comments that they'd like to make now? Deborah or Leslie? I see. No? Okay. So I guess that finishes our new business. And so we are going to now return to old business. Our old business is the discussion of the budget guidelines, discussion and approval, hopefully, of the budget guidelines. So in our packet are the budget guidelines that we discussed last Thursday at our meeting. And that was a good discussion. Since that time, we have had some, follow-up from our colleagues, Jeff and Leslie, I think, putting into writing many of their comments that they made in the meeting. And those were sent to us late yesterday, and we are appreciative of that and getting them in writing as we requested. And so Deborah and I have been through those comments, changes. They were very extensive. And we have basically think that, we already had budget guidelines that we felt were compromised, that addressed the salaries that, are being projected for fiscal year 22, because Roland has done a lot of work on that. We thought we were realistic in terms of the expenses in a environment with uncertainty. And so we don't need to go through what we've already gone through, but so we responded with, I think, really reaching out and accepting many of these or most of these comments, still retaining the spirit of what we as have considered to be realistic budget guidelines in today's environment. And so as we look forward, we know that there are unknowns, which I think Jeff may have been referring to in terms of the questions. And we also know that we have scheduled our February meetings, and we're asking our departments, obviously, to present their budgets. But we've also said, you know, we may ask you to rebudget part of it. We may ask you, you know, we don't know what's going to happen totally. And so we expect that there may be some, you know, changes during that period of time, and perhaps the discussions will be different than they were. So anyway, we sent our responses, and we have a proposal. So I don't, Deborah, would you like to talk?
So, yeah, so I guess I would say, you know, I know last year when Leslie Moriarty was the budget chair, they every suggestion that the Republicans had, there was sort of a motion that was made and discussed for each item. And I would say, in the spirit of doing what we're supposed to do as the budget committee, which is come forth with guidelines, I think that that is not necessary. I think we have accepted substantially a fair amount of your comments, and I would say we could agree that, you know, that we're on the same, you know, we're on the same place there. So there's no need to have a conversation. If we accepted your change, we can move on. There were some places where I would say that maybe we couldn't take your language exactly as suggested, but understood the point maybe, and then tried to soften the language a little and tweak it. And then there's really just a couple of points where I think that we'll have a conversation in February during budget, you know, capital, you know, and other items where it'll be addressed and doesn't need to be changed at this point in the budget guidelines. So I would hope that in the spirit of doing what we're tasked to do, which is prepare these guidelines, you know, maybe we can go through some of the items. Again, I would suggest that we don't discuss anything where we are in agreement, and take it from there with the goal of having a vote of these guidelines to set forth and to bring to the full BET for next week.
So if I may,
Leslie?
I'd like the opportunity to present the information and the comments that we had on the guidelines, and I talk about only the substantive changes, not all the wording changes and some of the text that I think that you've been referring to. I think that we still have a fair bit of disagreement over some of the big points here. And so I'd like the opportunity, since only one set of guidelines are posted, and that's fine, but to just go through those changes. I don't know, I'm happy to share my screen, or Roland can share the documents, because we sent the copy of our comments that went out yesterday to Roland and Pete as well. They could be posted publicly. That might be a fair way to do it as well. But I'd like to first go to the exhibits of the documents, because that really is what's driving the guidelines, is that Exhibit 1 and the mill rate calculation chart.
So Leslie, I would hope you would just hit the highlights, please.
Absolutely.
I mean, I remember vividly last year.
Well, last year was a little different. We had a whole month between the two readings of the guidelines. Here we've had very little time.
But despite the time, it made no difference, Leslie.
Well,
So anyway,
you can be as
so
pointed in your
do you
criticism
want-
of me last year as you want.
Okay,
That's fine.
so-
But
so-
Roland, do
so-
you want to put up the
Put on the hi-
exhibit revised, or would you like me to share the chart?
I can put it up.
Okay. So what you're seeing here is there are five exhibits attached to the back of the guidelines. This is the mill rate chart, and maybe you can make it a little larger, Roland, if possible. So let's start on the expenses. The expenses, I do want to note that the full salary increase from fiscal 21 to 22 is represented in the first two lines here, and that hasn't been typically the case. So I think we're in agreement on that. The reason, as you pointed out, Leslie, last time we looked at these, that the 101 line is so much smaller, the 0.58, is because the inherent assumption that the 2% that won't be needed in fiscal 21.
I have
in
a
the
point of
base
order here. I don't think that we need to be pulling up these spreadsheets. I think that what we need to do is to talk about the guidelines. We put something out, you came back with comments. Let's go through the
These
comments.
are part of the guideline comments that we have, and it drives the numbers in the text.
You
So
don't-
I'll only go through the changes that we're requesting.
Go through it. I would like to, I just don't think that we need to go through it in this way. I'm happy to go through, you want to go through your comments and walk through your, we could go through what we provided to you this morning, which takes your comments in black lines. So it shows exactly what was accepted and what was rejected. How would you like to do it? But I don't think we need to, there's only 2 or 3 points here where we actually are not completely in agreement.
I would like to make those points. So
Okay,
if
but I don't think you
continue, if I can continue, thank you. So on the 200 lines, we adjusted this because the information we just got from the Board of Education that Ms. Tarkington referred to on the COVID impact refers to the 1.9 million for special education out of district tuition being the correct number, not 1.6, which is in the base guideline. So we changed that to 1.9. The other number, which was not accepted or adopted by you and Leslie in your revisions, is the 2.5 million of unbudgeted expenses in the fiscal 1 budget that the Board of Ed doesn't have in the base budget and has indicated they need to be funded in the following year. So we have put in the 2.5 million for the Board of Education in those. I put it in 300s in the supply lines. I'm not sure whether it's in other late. Roland, if you could go down further to the capital. Capital is where we have the biggest point of disagreement. And I'm going to point to the top line numbers here and then ask that my backup charts be put up afterwards. But you have a capital number in the guidelines of $40 million. It's basically a level of maintenance capital. It's a rollover of the 40 million from last year, where some of the new initiatives that have been included in the budget were all postponed, and it looks like they're being postponed again. Additionally, in your set of guidelines, you've reduced the capital tax levy from the 51 million we had last year down to 45 million. And this guideline shows that we need a minimum of 52 million just to meet the debt policy numbers. I want to point out that moving the capital tax levy from 51 million to 45 million is going to gut our ability to fund capital projects, major improvement projects going forward. That includes town projects and Board of Ed projects. And it's a significant indicator of what the town would be able to spend moving forward. I would point out too, while guidelines are talked about as being guidelines and coming back, the departments do try to build to a budget. So if you're telling the first selectman he has $40 million to spend next year, down from 113 million, which is in the current fiscal 22 year, there's a whole lot of projects that are being moved out. Just to go down to the bottom of the chart, if you had adopted these changes, what it relates to is a 3.21% increase in the mill rate. At this point in time, there is more information we get in the February meetings. If that number is variable, it could easily go down to other levels, but it is not at the 1.46, which the guidelines that you have put together point out and kind of lead people to believe that that is the number and an even lower number that you would be targeting. Roland, if you could put up the other spreadsheet, the capital spreadsheet. I just want to walk through why this chart has a $62 million capital current year project number. That's not necessarily our recommendation, but I want to show how we got there. So Roland, if you can take down this share and put up the capital budget chart.
There were 2 charts. The chart you're looking for is the one that, the first one I think you want is the estimate of annual maintenance capital. Is that what you want first?
Well, I just want to tell him what the chart's name was so he can more easily find it. Okay, so if you can click on first the annual maintenance tab for me. So what I did here is just to get a sense of what does $40 million get us in terms of projects. I went to last year's capital budget and looked at the items that are typically budgeted every year going forward, and to see how much we have of routine capital projects. So within the highway department, we have things like highway maintenance, the paving program, stormwater compliance and maintenance, and bridge replacement program. If over the period of the 15-year plan last year, that worked out to about $9 million annually spent on those programs. Additionally, you've got town hall projects, asbestos related. We have vehicle purchases, library capital, parks and rec capital, the dry dock ferry inspection capital. So those things, when added to the 9 million, get up to about 15 million for average annual capital. Now, in any given year, that's going to be plus or minus a little bit, but that's the average number. Then if we go down to the schools number, and the schools, what I did there is I took the 15-year aggregate number in this column G, it gets out to $360 million in the categories, not including their master plan. It is just their maintenance capital that they've budgeted out in that 15-year plan. Took the 360 million, divided it by 15 to get to an average of $30 million a year. Again, it's normally a lumpy kind of budget and lumpy spending, but that is what they anticipate they need to maintain the buildings. The two items there combined, the 30 million and the 15 million, get to you about a $45 million just annual basic capital that we have. It doesn't include any maintenance project, any improvement projects, and then there are other smaller maintenance things that come in and out. So now let's go to the improvements tab. And again, this information comes from the capital budget. And if you can make this a little bit bigger as well, Roland, I think that would be helpful. At least on my screen, it's kind of small. But the projects I've listed here are the major projects that we have had in the capital plan for the next, well, in the capital plan. So we've got Eastern Greenwich Civic Center, the Hamel Rink, Baldwin Park improvements and relocating the park building, remediation project totaling 25 million. We have the master plan for the Board of Ed, which totals to a lot of money. But we also have the Byram River, this improving the flooding in Byram River area, the flooding project in.
Leslie, can you just sort of wrap up some of this? We don't need this much detail. We
Okay,
need to
so-
get refocused on what the key issues are. I asked you if you would please just look at key issues.
Well, this rolls into the key issue of what's a realistic capital plan, both in terms of what the number is for the fiscal 22 budget, as well
Right,
as
and-
what's happening for the capital tax levy. I will summarize. What I did here is I took really, this isn't a proposal, but I said, okay, what absolutely has to be done next year, which we think might be coming in. And I picked out 22 million of projects. It doesn't include Eastern Greenwich Civic Center, which we just heard they would like to have that funded. There are
I
some
think
projects
that
they're not being funded. So now let's go to the fiscal
Let's go
22
back to
modified
the main-
capital plan. If you can let me finish this presentation, I think you will find it helpful. So here is our debt model. I had to take time this weekend. I developed the debt model, building it from last year's, putting in just this minimal capital plan. And you can see in order to get to our
So
funded
Leslie, can we get back to
policy-
the main?
All right, Leslie, if you let me talk, I will get there. But if talking over me isn't going to help me talk faster.
Okay.
Thank you. If you can scroll to the bottom a little bit so you can see that our debt policies right now, this 10.1% is the minimum level of cash we have to fund the projects, and that would be at $52 million, and that is acknowledging that there might be some improvement projects that this board should be considering to doing. So now let's go back to, so those are the key drivers, okay? The rest, as you said in your document, you looked at some of the wording changes that we suggested for the document, but the key substantive issues in the guidelines as presented are, number one, the targeted mill rate. You make the statement that the Exhibit 1 is the budget you would approve today if you knew with what you know, and that the 1.46% mill rate is a target, and you're actually hoping to get down to a 0 mill rate. We're making the point, Jeff and I, that to do that, you're gutting the capital plan going forward. And it is not, and you can take down this chart, Roland. It is not in the best interest of the town, in our opinion. Secondly,
Okay, so let me,
let-
while you're on
let me
cap,
go-
while you're on capital, let me just add that at the moment, we have $120 million of open capital projects, of work to be done, and work seems to be done in this COVID environment more slowly. So we can talk about the future, but we also need to talk about the present and how we can get this all done and, you know, make
Leslie,
sure that we're working.
Would you kindly let Mrs. Moriarty finish this presentation? You have asked her to put forward what the point of view is, and ever since she started, you're getting nothing but talking over her. Let her please finish the presentation, and then frankly, I would like to speak as well.
So as I was saying, the 1.46 mill rate in the exhibit attached, to me, in my view, in my analysis, guts the capital program that the town is looking forward to keep up the value of our buildings. We have 3 schools that are not ADA compliant, and they wouldn't be done for years, as far as I can tell, if in funding capital at that level. Secondly, the underfunding of the Board of Education that we did in this year's budget is continuing in next year's budget. It's on a percentage wise, it may not look like a big number, but there are challenges there, and we have issues with not funding that 2.5 million of expenses they've indicated they need. Those are really the biggest concerns we have. They're major concerns. They're concerns such that I can't approve the guidelines as drafted, as modified. And I don't feel like there's been any adjustment or consideration of the points we made on this particular. This is our first time talking about it, so maybe we should go back and forth a little bit on those issues, and maybe we can get to a different place on the guidelines. Referring to the open capital, Leslie, you are right. There is my chart as I've got an open capital report that may be different time of yours, but I have where it's about 105 million of open and available capital and encumbered capital. I know you include encumbered in that. I take exception to including the 33 million that's for fiscal 21 projects. The projects were only approved in June, and departments haven't had an awful lot of time to get started or going on those projects. So the expectation that that money is lagging, I don't think is correct. And then when we dissect some of these other numbers, we know DPW projects. There are bridge projects we have to appropriate early, and it takes years for the state to reimburse. We have we have $7 million for Carter Field, and we know that that's moving along here. We have $3 million on Glenville and New Leb school construction projects, which have been complete. We have $1.5 million for Western Middle School remediation, which we know is moving, is dependent upon the state's action. There are any number of projects here that there is a reason that potentially it's not being actively worked on, not because we can't get to it, but because there are other actions that need to be taken in order to move forward on. So there is a backlog of capital, but that's some of the nature of capital. There's timing. The Board of Ed has moved to a model where they really have a 2-year, the appropriations are intended to be for 2 years because they do all their planning in the first year and execution the other year. And they're also limited by the summer months. I know I'm throwing in a lot of rationales here, but it's not 105 million of capital that's sitting that's going to be executed tomorrow. There are reasons that some of that is delayed. And I don't think you stop the planning going forward while you wait to clean this up, because you're going to end up with a 4 or 5 year lag where nothing is happening. And our residents expect more from us than that. I'll stop there.
So I'd like to speak to it if I may. During the budget process in February, we ask each of these departments to come and explain to us. It's usually the very first questions we ask them, to go through these open projects and tell me where they stand. With a number of the projects, they tell us, yes, this project is done, and a small sum then is lapsed and returned to us. The greater amount usually are projects that are open and need to be open while they await for land use approvals from the Army Corps of Engineers, DEP, the issuance of licenses and the like. It is relatively rare that we're being told that, oh yes, there's no reason why these numbers aren't being spent. We're having difficulty completing projects. That's not at all what we're being told. Mr. Tarkington, you raised at the outset your gratification with having these questions responded to. And in private conversation, you were very complimentary of the detail that was forthcoming on these answers. Yet you need to focus on the fact that the chief financial officer at the schools has come back to you in response to the questions and said to you that special ed tuitions for out-of-district placements plus settlements are projected to come in at 1.9. To schedule that in your figures at 1.6, I mean, do you have some information to conclude that miraculously in the upcoming year we're going to have less special ed students, or that the courtside resolutions are going to come in 20% less than the school board is projecting to us? Because failing that, I think for us to do guidelines properly is to take the projection that you're getting from the experts who are dealing with this when they say to you, no, your settlements and your out of tuition payments, your out of district tuition payments are going to come in at 1.9, not 1.6. They came forward with $1,818,000 of expenditures that they used funds that were available from the finishing year to purchase material and to pay expenses for the upcoming year. And that was effectively a subsidy. For you then to take the resulting then reduced budget and use that as a base and project it forward is simply missing $1,818,000 worth of expense that the district is going to incur, unless you're going to fund that by some other source that we don't know about. They also pointed out to you that $1,250,416 was taken in cuts, of which the questionnaire said to you $673,000 of that are one-time expenditures only. Are you really planning to buy no more library books for the library going forward? Are we really planning not to pay license fees on things because if you do that, you're going to make significant changes in the educational program. If you're going to take them at their word, they're saying to you that the $673,000 of cuts that they can't repeat, plus the $1,818,000 of expenses in the present year, which they paid out of an excess from the prior year, those two aggregate $2,491,000, reasonably rounded to $2.5 million. And the figure that you are talking over and not including in the 300s that the modeling by Mrs. Moriarty put forward is that $2.5 million that Sean is saying to you has to be included and is not presently included in your figures. So on the expense figures under schools, the figures that you're seeing in the work product that Mrs. Moriarty has put forward in collaboration with me is simply the inclusion of those items, the responses to the questionnaire that you were quite complimentary about, the detail that you've gotten from the chief financial officer at schools. On the capital side, I think the modeling that was done for you to demonstrate to you that your simple maintenance budgets are a higher number at $45 million than the total capital figure at $40 million that you're prognosticating. So you must be saying that we think we're doing way too much maintenance and we need to do less maintenance. And with that, I take you back to Hamilton Avenue. And by the way, the lawsuits against us from parents claiming their children were injured by mold infection while they were students at Hamilton Avenue, that's a clear product of what you get when you don't do maintenance. That you can quarrel with the figures that were used by Mrs. Moriarty in her very thoughtful modeling, but I think it demonstrates to you quite clearly that you have, in fact, about $45 million worth of maintenance. By the way, there's a $5 million slippage there. When you take the $45 million that the modeling of Mrs. Moriarty showed in maintenance, plus the $22.1 million of likely new projects, that totals not 62 million, but 67 million. She reduced it by 5 million just to be conservative in the sums. When my proposal a few days ago when we met in the special meeting was I wasn't even content with the $62 million of the modeling. I thought actually that there was a time that 4 very sage people who do quite a bit of this work in budgeting sat down 6 months ago and looked at the capital projects for fiscal year 21, and by a 4-0 vote came to a conclusion of which items should be pushed out, which items should be done, which items should be reduced in amount and how. And we came up at that point with at $72,962,000. I know you appreciate the quality of that work those 4 people did, because the 4 people I'm talking about is the 4 of us. And it was the conclusion that we reached in April, late March, actually, I guess, in fairness, sorry. We really could be prognosticating here, not 40 million, not 62 million, but $73 million, which was the number that we concluded only a few months ago. If you use that figure, and if you go back to what our protocol has been on capital tax levy, you'd be understanding that the capital tax levy that we set on an orderly process of increasing our capital tax levy by $3 million a year, we would be for the upcoming year not at $45 million or $48 million, but at $59 million on the capital tax levy. And by taking an artificially low figure for the capital tax levy, all you're doing is hampering our ability to deal with the capital program for the purpose of artificially giving what appears to be a lower than normal mill rate increase. And I think that's not fair to our public. I think what we need to do is I think we need to make a more appropriate guesstimate figure on our total capital. I think we need to go back to our protocol of steady increases in our capital tax levy. And I think whatever's the resulting mill rate on that, we should accept as being the mill rate for the purpose of our guidelines. And that's really what's been put before you. The difficulty with going to the text of the writing, the 5-page writing that covers it, which was Mrs. Hess's suggestion, is that the inability of us to come together on these basic figures. It isn't a lot of figures, it's only a few figures, but we're materially apart on this Exhibit 1. And the text of your changes relies on the 1.4% interest, the 4% increase in the mill rate, and it relies upon the capital figures and the method of your handling the capital. And it's hard for us to agree on the text when we don't agree on the underlying figures. The remaining problem still remains. You chose some new language by which to say that the objective of the BET is a 0 increase in mill rate. And we keep saying to you that the philosophy with which at least 2 of us approach this job is not to commit ourselves to a 0% increase in the mill rate, but rather to do a thoughtful balancing back and forth between services and mill rate with a careful weather eye to the financial pressure that our tax-paying citizens are under. And that's what's missing from the text in the guidelines. But with all that said, we'd be glad to go through the text. We're not going to quarrel every change with you, but there's 4 or 5 places where we just find ourselves at places that we just can't agree with the way you've articulated it in the guidelines. These guidelines were brought up quickly at a special meeting less than a week ago. The changes that you've proposed, we received at 10:12 this morning, 48 minutes before the inception of this meeting. We've gone through the changes, but in 48 minutes, it's hard to be exhaustive with it. If there's an appetite to, in fact, do what this board should be doing, and that is sit down as 4 people and try and work out something that we can agree upon, then I think it isn't going to happen at this meeting. I think we should try and set up a workshop and have that dialogue, and then set up another special meeting at which we can do the approval or approve it at the next regular meeting, which wouldn't be in time for the October meeting of the BET, it'd be in time for the November meeting. But I think there's a giddy up here, which is not appropriate, unless the view of at least two of our members is we don't really care what the other two have to say. We've written these guidelines and that's what we're going to vote for, in which event you're going to end up with a 2-2 vote here. And then I'm not sure, but something unattractive at the full BET as well. And I think we should try and avoid that.
So I appreciate your comments, you know, and it's interesting that you only have one side of when people got information in. I think you did an excellent job, Jeff, of putting forth your points to me last Tuesday when that original guidelines went out. Again, you articulated the points, which I saw again, you know, in writing. I didn't see those until basically, you know, dinner time last night. You know, that was from last Thursday. You can't just show one side. I think that, you know, in many ways, we've all been trying to work together. I agree with you that we work well together when we do that work. I don't believe we need as many additional meetings or those additional meetings that you're talking about. I do think that these are guidelines, as you have pointed out, and many a times that's in an unusual environment. I think that we don't know what's going to happen between now and February. We know those will be detailed meetings. It was you, Jeff, that asked and said, look, we need to know more about BOE capital. I said, maybe we need to do BOE on 2 days. You know, the same week, we've got a Tuesday and a Friday. That would give us more time to go through them and really understand. You know, that isn't in the guidelines. It isn't a written concession, but it's certainly, I thought it was a great idea and maybe something that we should consider. So, you know, we can, you know, continue to talk about these. I think that my own opinion is that, you know, last year, you know, you put forth the guidelines and we did come to agreement with you, but, you know, many of our points weren't accepted. And they were only on the day of the meeting. And then I was, you know, whatever, I'm not going to go through that. So I do think that we're here to work on something. I do also think that, you know, we can go out later if the environment changes, if, you know, whatever. And, but, you know, the departments need something now. And I think that it was Leslie who suggested the extra special meeting. I did support and accommodate her. I think that was a great idea, and I'm glad that we did it. But we're working within a time frame here where, you know that the Board of Education is working on their budgets, and so are the town departments. We know that from even the departments that we manage, finance and the assessor's office. So I see Deborah's hand is up.
So I have some thoughts, but I know Mike has his hand up. So as the chair and also last year serving on the budget committee, I would kind of let him go before me, if that's okay. Is that all right?
Well, I mean, I'm happy to have him go before you, but normally our process here, Deborah, is for our members to go ahead of
I know. I'm yielding to him. I'm giving him a chance. Just don't talk too much, Mike.
So Mike, I'll call on you.
So let's try this without getting anybody upset personally. I feel like I'm in a meeting a year ago on guidelines and it's just the roles have reversed. I hear comments and I hear about use of fund balance and there's been an outcry to use it, and now I hear there's not an outcry. So let's figure what the budget committee needs to do, because Mr. Raymer at the end of his comments probably had the most important comments that I agree with. We are, as I listen to the four of you and I look at these presentations, first of all, this year, obviously there's been some labor negotiations going on in town that have sort of delayed us. I have to tell you, I'm sort of shocked on some of those, and we've had an outcry for getting help from the bargaining units, and I think we're getting it there. And quite frankly, I can't even tell you if the numbers are accurate or not. I really have to see the mathematics work out. The first set of guidelines said, look, knowing what we know today, here's what it looks like. It would be a 1.46 mill rate. Now, today's October, and you're going to finish up in March. So I think they still have 5 months in between the two for a lot of things to happen. So I want to just deal with operating. If you look at our operating budget, we need about $17 or $18 million more cash. That's presuming you're going to run the government the same way you're running it now. That's a different conversation. We should stay away from that for the moment. But I think that is going to be the conversation in February and March. So you need about 18 million bucks, okay, to just presumably rolling things up, okay? And if you look at the spreadsheet that Roland has or you have, that's the exact mathematics. Not my math, not your math. It's what is in front of us. On the capital side, you want to commit to $24 million more capital, and you want to borrow 18 million more. You guys can argue about open capital. It will know what's lagging. I heard the word capital lagging. We'll know what's lagging from this year in February. We don't know this year, but we'll know in February. So here's what the budget committee needs to do. I mean, we're looking at the schools. The schools are requesting we think they're requesting about $8.3 million more for next year than this year. We already allocated 5.5 in the first go around. We already knew about 5.5, and that's what the first draft of guidelines says. Now, special ed, I think I heard Leslie Moriarty say it's up about $300,000. So I would say our 5.5 is probably 5.8. So we're talking about a spread difference of 2 million and change for some other things that they want. But then, we'll have to have a conversation about enrollment. We'll have to have a conversation about the summer school changes. So the spread of 2.5 could work its way down to 2, 1.5. It could go up a little, down a little. Who knows what's going to happen between now and then? But we have a known thought process. We know what we're going to commit to now, and we know what we think the Board of Ed's going to request. Okay, so we got $450 million on the table here. And we're going to kill each other over $2 million in schools. We haven't had a single conversation yet about any of this stuff. I mean, look at the enrollment. I mean, I'm looking at it last night. I mean, enrollment's down. I didn't anticipate that. We thought it was going to go up. So let's talk about what we're doing different this year. Revenues. I haven't heard anybody touch on that. We are accounting for some revenues this year that we have all agreed in previous years to be zero. So we're bringing some of those back in. Are we bringing them in enough or not? I don't know. You guys can figure that out in February, because you all want to be on the budget committee. That's your job to figure that stuff out. Are we anticipating or not? I think what Jeff is saying is, look, you need to go back to the table. We've seen what this community responds to with what they hear. I'm just saying, look at what your known is today. Anticipate where you want to go. As far as the capital projects, I think I've said it. We have lost our prioritization. Everything is maintenance. Okay, and we're just doing this. Okay, we have lost, and I'll quote some of the other leaders in town. Priorities change. Well, okay, without a CIP process, if a priority changes, I don't know about it. So I'm counting on the budget committee to push very hard for a CIP, because if my project doesn't make it this year, I want to make sure I can see it moving up a list and that we get to it. I mean, you guys just talked about the skating rink at the Civic Center. They go back 15 years on a CIP project list. Those are 15-year-old projects we're just getting to now. So I encourage everybody, if you guys want to table this, do a draft, I would say you should try to do a workshop. I would talk to Ben. I would try to do it live. You can do that. You are allowed to do that and limit the capacity in the room. You can do live and Zoom so other people can participate. But you've got to stop the rhetoric will hurt. It hurts the community. I look at all of this, the capital tax levy. Leslie Moriarty and I last year, I'll give you an example of capital tax levy that you need to think about. We saw all the change, surplus from capital projects dumping back into capital non-recurring. We saw that going up. Now it is a tab in our fund balance, but we had a conversation about using $3 or $4 or $5 million, which is in the model. It's depicted. I didn't hear that talked about today, which is actual statutory by state statute money that can only be used on capital projects, not operating, right? Bringing that in. I haven't heard you talk about that yet, but you're not far apart. Language, I agree with Jeff. Language is going to follow a little bit after you get the numbers, but at the end of the day, if you want to spend 10 million more in capital and 17 or 18 more in operating, that's 28 million. I do not suspect that every $3.7 million is a 1% mill rate. I don't think you want a 9 or 10% mill rate increase. I don't think that's what anybody wants. So we offset that with revenues and use of fund balance and the other things. So you got to get together. I strongly suggest you what I would do for the sake of arguments, because I think there has been a lot of language cleared up and changes made, not fully agreed, is I think you ought to move that second draft so you have that. as something to work for, because I think you're closer on the second draft. I'm just quoting what I heard Leslie say. We're not going to go into the language. We've changed some of that. And I think you need to schedule a workshop, because a 2-2 vote won't make the BET agenda. Okay, our guidelines, our budget handbook says we do guidelines in October. It's only October 12th or 13th or 14th. So we have time, and I have no problem calling a special meeting. I'm getting good at it. But whatever it takes, I mean, this is what we need to do. The community, I heard a lot of things about what residents expect and everything. What the residents expect is a balanced look, a neutral look. There are just as many people out there wondering right now. Look at that revenue chart you had. There's a lot of things not going on that used to go on in town. I don't know what's going to change, and I'm simply not going to make a decision right now. I just want to give the departments an idea of what we're thinking about doing. Mr. Raymer made a comment the other day. He would love to see a zero tax rate too, because he too knows that there are residents in town that are not enjoying this COVID economic times. We all know that. We know that. And we want to be sympathetic to all parties as much as we can. So whatever you decide to do, I think you ought to, I don't think you're going to get there today, but I think you need to make it a goal to get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, so I get my time back now that
Yes, Deborah. Yes, absolutely.
Thanks, Mike. I mean, for me, some of this is I don't want to deliberate today what's going to be deliberated in February. We put a special ed number in before we had received the answers. $300,000, I'm willing to have that conversation. Putting more money into the school, I think about what happened last year, where there was money that was requested and then ultimately they didn't need it in COVID. And part of it is we're still operating in uncertainty. So I don't want to put the money in today. I'm not saying that I'm not willing to put it in, but let's kind of see how some of this unfolds, and we'll know more, hopefully, in February. Some of the capital won't flow through to the mill rate, right? Because it'll be funded through borrowings. But again, we talk about prioritization, we talk about all the open capital, and how much, and for me, the big thing is how much can we realistically, physically do, right? And let's find out what that answer is. So I'm open to having all of these conversations, but I don't feel like we need to have them now as part of the guidelines. I think it's part of the budget deliberation in February. And I mean, that seems like that should be the right approach, and not sitting here and arguing now over the guidelines. I think it's fair. I think we're very close on the Board of Ed. I think that it's capital, and let's see where open capital comes out, and let's see the priorities. I mean, to me, those are the biggest differences that I think are completely resolvable in February, when we have more clarity.
I think Jeff had his hand up first, or Jeff, was that from before and I didn't put it down?
It was from before, and I don't care what order I speak in. I would like to speak when you get to it.
Okay, so if it was from before, then Leslie had her hand up first, and I'll come back to you.
Yeah, the difference I see, and if we can reach agreement, that's great. The difference I see is that the guidelines do set the tone of the conversation. And there are really only three big issues that Jeff and I have issues with. But let's just start on capital. If a 40 million targeted capital project number's in there, you're sending the signal that that's the level that you want the first selectman to come in at. Not that he could come in with an 80 million budget or a 60 million budget, because then the criticism will be that the size of the budget exceeds what the BET anticipated. And looking at the amount of maintenance capital, and we know the improvement projects that are waiting, including remediation, which we have all said needs to be done as soon as we possibly can get it accomplished, is going to push that number up. The second thing, critical thing, and again, for the BET to indicate that we're willing to drop the capital tax levy to $45 million. I know that we're using $3 million of the capital non-recurring, but to me, that is a source of funds. We're using to lower the mill rate. It doesn't reflect what we're really, even though it goes towards capital, it doesn't really lower our obligation in the capital tax levy. And as everyone on this board knows, that's the base upon which we look to for next year. So if we lower that capital tax levy to $45 million next year, we'll be hard pressed that $3 million is, 0.75% of a mill rate. And we're going to be back at the table again. We can't afford to do that. So we're really hurting ourselves. This budget, this Exhibit 1 is presented, is using $9 million of capital, of sources to reduce the mill rate that can't be reproduced next year. So to replace those funds, it's all new taxation. And I think we have to look forward to approve a budget, or to look at our budget tactics at this point in time, which is what these things are. We typically do that in February and March and April. We know more about the real budget and what we're willing to do. Thirdly, if you produce a guideline that says 1.46% estimated mill rate, and we hope to go lower, I believe that the majority on this board would be really hard pressed to go higher than that. Let's say you reconsider your position on the capital tax levy, or you reconsider your position on that 2.5 million of expenses in the Board of Ed, which are not being included in this budget. You're going to be hard pressed to go above it. That's human nature. That's past experience on this board. And so that's why I have a really difficult time putting out that Exhibit 1 as being our starting point. Typically, that Exhibit 1 expresses what we know now as far as the inputs, and not how the BET would necessarily handle it, not how we would lower tax levy or the use of fund balance in any different manner than the prior budget had. These guidelines are different in that area. I think they're substantive. I think they're important. And I think next year, when it comes to approving a budget, no matter how much new information we have created a sandbox that is going to be too small to work within.
So I think I heard Mrs. Hess say that we don't actually have much dispute on the Board of Ed budget, that the guidelines was submitted by Mrs. Tarkington before they received the input from the Board of Ed, that the special ed cost of out-of-district tuitions is going to grow to 1.9. So I take it that Mrs. Tarkington and Mrs. Hess are open to increasing that by the $3 million figure. And I also
300,000.
300,000. Sorry, I just trying 3 million, but I'll
Get some more money in there, Mr. Kramer.
Sorry. You got to watch me every second.
Yes.
Secondly, I didn't hear any objection from anyone to the clarification on the $2.5 million of extra operating expense in the 300s, the 670 some odd thousand in cuts that can't be repeated, plus the $1,818,000 in materials and supplies and the like purchased for fiscal year 21 at a fiscal year $20. Those two items together are $2.5 million. So I think I'm hearing that the $2.5 million can be added to the 300s line. At that point, we've reduced our problems, our areas of disagreement, to the handling of capital.
Can I just, that's not what I just want to be clear. I was saying that we weren't far apart. Mike said that we were maybe, I don't know, call it $1 to $2 million apart. I'm willing to have the conversation on special ed. I'm not at this point willing to add in the other line as incrementally above the 2% to the Board of Ed. I don't know if that's how you interpreted what I said. I just want to be clear. That's not what I was saying.
Okay, well then
I'm willing to have the conversation in February, but I don't think that we need to have that conversation now.
I don't want to go into February with a guidelines that had artificial figures that we knew were inaccurate. That's the point of the modeling that Mrs. Moriarty was advancing to you. I'm not sure how open to it you were, but I think it's important that you recognize that if you take $2.5 million worth of expense in fiscal year 21 and you pay it out of fiscal year $20, that you're looking at $2.5 million worth of understated expenses in fiscal year 21. When you take the budget for 21 and you advance it by 2%, you're looking at a resulting item which is still missing the $2.5 million, actually theoretically $2.5 million plus 2% of that, but I'll ignore the other 2%. You're dealing with a number that you know is incorrect. And so I think the modeling based on that is simply a mistake. Whether or not you're looking for capital at the $73 million that we were talking as a foursome last March, or whether or not you're talking about the 40 million, or whether or not you're talking about the modeling figure at 62,100,000 that Mrs. Moriarty has put forward to you, these are an artificial item. We don't know what the item is. I'm suggesting to you that you be accepting of the 62,100,000 because it was in a middle ground. It was a middle ground between the artificially low number that was advanced by Mrs. Tarkington and the number that we as a budget committee had focused upon just 6 months ago. I honestly think the 62 million is a very appropriate figure. And then we can have the conversation in February that yes, it turns out that the capital projects aren't 62 million, they're 80 million or they're 30 million, whatever it is that we discover it is. But to start the process with an artificially low list of capital, which then leads you to an artificially low capital tax levy, which then leads you to an artificially low mill rate increase, just is not a fair way to deal with your departments or with your citizens, your tax-paying citizens.
I think, Jeff, that there are some things to talk about here. You know, when you quote some of those numbers, I mean, one of the things that we did do was to the various and sundry accounts, we added 2% increase to all of the Board of Education accounts, you know, from the 200s up. There were some other things that we did here, and I think they need to be counted. We had the response from Sean. While he talked about the increases, he also talked about, you know, it was almost, I think it was like 1.9 million. There were a couple of different grants and things coming in terms of revenues. We haven't considered those revenues, and they're talking about expenses. I do agree with Deborah that, you know, one of the things that you know, has been enhanced, and quite frankly, there were some very good points that you raised and Leslie have raised, and we've included all of those. But I do think that, you know, there may be some balancing here where there are additional revenues coming in as well as the expenses. And I do agree with Deborah that that is really what February is for. I think what this does create is a framework that recognizes the special education money. Again, you know, I think I mentioned to Leslie earlier that $300,000 difference. I mean, that is something that we found out since. You know, I think that you find, you know, that we work well together, but that we need to create a framework. I mean, clearly, maybe $40 million is too low for capital. We don't know. We don't, you know, we know that there's 120 million that's yet to be done right now, which is, you know, enormous, especially when work is being done much more slowly. But we're going to find that out. And, you know, last year, we asked the departments to prioritize decreases. They never came in with any of that prioritization. Maybe we need to talk about, you know, what would they prioritize if there was more money? Things here that perhaps are, you know, at this point in time, I don't know, prioritization is critical. And that, as Mike has pointed out, is missing here. And I think, you know, on many fronts, too much pressure is being put on the budget committee when, you know, some of these other issues need to be addressed. And we put all of that in the budget guidelines. And where you expanded on our points or added some really good points, I think we've been very inclusive to consider them.
What's your reaction? What's your reaction to our comments about the capital tax levy and that 45 million does not put the town in a position to be able to fund the capital plans that it's discussed?
Well, I'm not sure, you know, again, when the original plan was put together, Leslie, we were in a very high inflation environment. And today we're in a low inflation environment. Also, we had expected debt service to be $3 million higher, just, I'm using a round number, I don't have it, than it, it turns out it will be. So this was an arbitrary thing to, put in there. It was using some of the known facts, making adjustments for time, just the same way we were fortunate to, have more facts available for salaries. We think they're good. So it wasn't just a reaction and then doing something, but, quite frankly, we've heard our colleagues on the budget committee talk about using some of these funds that we've accumulated too much or whatever. You know me, I am probably the number one hawk on doing maintenance. So there's no question about that. And so, just as you've talked here, we want to make sure our buildings are maintained. We don't want any buildings deteriorating. The same thing with the roads. There's a certain image that we all want to do. So, to even imply that that wouldn't take place. But I think we need to do it in the framework of what can be accomplished by all. And right now, we'll have a much better idea, as Deborah pointed out, in February, and what we're trying to do.
But the proposal already takes the reduction that we took in the capital tax levy and reduces it substantially another year. And as you know, increasing that capital tax levy is always a challenge, right? It's an upward increase on the mill rate. I don't, when it was first started, it talked about trying to get that level up to be equal to our maintenance capital. And that's when we didn't have a large reinvestment program. At 45 million in here, because the 3 million taken out of capital non-recurring fund is a one-time shot. You can't do it again. It's going to be lower, maybe, so, and we're not getting much more money into that capital non-recurring fund. We're not funding by cash projects anymore as much. So you're starting from a lower base. So you're now going to be at the level of maintenance capital, and we're going to have to slowly, annually build that up to be able to fund our improvement projects, of which they're lined up. They're stacked up back to back when the BET gets the comfort in approving them, and both from a financial standpoint as well as the management standpoint. Those are absolute reasonable questions to ask about that. But there's no need to do that. You're doing that at early in the year, essentially promising a very low mill rate for next year without having had the time to go through the analysis to understand the impact of that and the long-term impact of that. And it's just the wrong way to start this process, because we're backing ourselves into a corner that's going to have long-term implications.
So I don't know.
Deborah wants to speak, and then I'll make some comments.
So I don't think you
Deborah?
can look, yes, I don't think you can look at the $45 million number. I think you have to look at 48. I think the way we had presented it and you had changed it was really to see the number before the use of the capital non-recurring, so that you're really looking at 48 on a same basis. And the real driver from my perspective was the fact that the debt payments were down, and that was driving that change, but that the capital year over year would in essence be flat. Keeping in mind, I think the point we're missing is we're not in the old normal yet, right? And I don't know that we'll ever go back to old normal, and there's going to be a new normal. So we're sort of, we talked about this at the last meeting, and we have to figure out where we'll be. So I think this is an attempt to put something out there that recognizes that we're not in a normal environment, and we need flexibility, and we may need to change this thing up or down depending on what happens in 6 months, right? None of us saw what was happening last March. We approved the budget in March, and then look what happened with lockdowns, et cetera. So I think from a starting point, it's fair based on the fact that we don't know where we're going yet, right? Like if there's another, where the winter brings us with respect to COVID. So I hear your points, and it's harder to go up than it is to go down. But I think that you need to recognize in a period of uncertainty, you need to be conservative. And so, and you need to reflect the fact that there is, I think, significant uncertainty in the economic environment. So that is why I think we are where we are in the Capitol. So it's, anyway, I don't think we need to have that conversation, but listen, we're not gonna, it seems to me that this is not gonna be resolved today. It's like you said, there's only less than a handful of items to discuss. I might suggest maybe something Thursday in the morning, try to find a couple hours, and maybe we could try to come to agreement on some of these couple of open items rather than sit and go round and round. We know where we're different. I think on the words, we're in a good place. And maybe we could try to resolve these few open items in advance of the full BET on Monday morning. I mean, Monday, whatever, full BET.
So Deborah beat me to it. I was going to suggest something similar, but good for Deborah. And I saw Jeff's hand up there. I don't want to end this or move the subject away. If he had something to say here that you'd like to say, Jeff, or
What Deborah's
is it
proposing-
once again? I'm sorry.
No, sorry. You finish what you were saying.
I've lost.
Then I'll jump in. I had started my comments the last time by saying perhaps then we should sit down at a work session to try and iron this out. There's a debt policy meeting that I think is useful for many of us to audit. Others of us, I'm thinking of Mrs. Moriarty, actually serve on that committee at 2:45 on Thursday. I don't want to butt up against that. But I'd be happy to meet on Thursday morning, maybe meeting at some physical distance within the town hall meeting room. Old as I am, would be a good way to do it. Maybe we actually can have a more meaningful conversation if we're physically all in the same room. I can tell you that if the position of two are that we're not adding $300,000 to the special ed, we're not adding $2.5 million or any number close to it to the 300s in the Board of Ed. We're not changing $40 million worth of capital. We're not changing the capital tax levy from the $45/48 million. If you're there, save us the trouble, because I sure won't be able to vote for that. I won't pretend to speak for Mrs. Moriarty. If the text of the guidelines is going to read that the objective of the BET is to get to a mill rate increase of 0, I don't think I can sign on to that's my sole objective unless it also contains verbiage that says that we're attempting to balance mill rate against the services that we're supplying. But if there's some receptivity to a dialogue on these figures and on that wording, I would like to go back to the thought that I raised in my earlier comment. Yes, please, let's have a work session. If that means we have to have a special meeting to vote to approve this and try and do that in time for the BET, that's fine. If we can't do it in time for the BET on Monday, but the chair of the BET is open to having a special meeting of the BET, as he indicated a few moments ago he would be, that would work as well. I would like to try and close the gap and resolve these difficulties, but it assumes that the parties have some flexibility, both sides.
Okay, because, all right, it feels a little bit, Jeff, to me, like it's kind of like your way, or like we have to come to you.
Not
Otherwise,
at all.
okay,
Not at all.
What I would suggest at this point is let's figure out what the next steps forward are offline, and then we will notice a meeting or timing, etc. Because I think that's the best way to do it at this point.
And I think when that meeting is noticed, if we can find the right time, it'd be important to put as attachments to that agenda, the documents that have been referred to tonight, both the input that came in from Jeff and me on the guidelines, your response to our inputs. I think I want to keep this very transparent so that members of the public know kind of the process that we followed.
That's fine. But can I just add one? I do feel like there's a lot, that you're expecting more from us in terms of meeting you versus, I think last year there were comments that were made to the budget that weren't taken. And so it feels a little one-sided in terms of you're only willing to approve if we give you more. But yet I felt last year we came with a lot of suggestions that were not approved, and yet we still supported the guidelines. And that's something that's just a little bothersome to me.
I believe we agreed on Exhibit 1. So you're talking about text changes, but again,
I don't remember.
Last year was last year, all right? Where we are now, the guidelines you presented, we start from your position. So Jeff and I are always kind of working uphill to insert changes into what's your original document. We don't want to think that way. I don't think any of us should think that way. If we're trying to get to a document that we can all agree on, we pointed out some kind of key substantive points that we're pretty strong about maintaining. And, you may feel very the same way about your position, which would preclude agreement. But I think that's all that he was saying.
So Leslie,
if Deborah is saying that that any movement from you is too much of a concession to us, then we don't need to have a work session. If you're saying the numbers will have to be the numbers that are in front of us right now in the draft of Exhibit A, then we can vote and have it be 2-2 and save everybody a lot of time, and we'll see where we go from there. All I'm asking of you is we'll try and come with a flexibility. Please, you come with a flexibility. We're not making promises, neither are you, but it's worth a try. But if you don't have any flexibility, Deborah, then there's no reason for us to meet on Thursday or any other time. I don't speak for Mrs. Moriarty. I will not be able to vote in favor of the figures that are in front of me on Exhibit 1 right now.
So I just want to come back to one point that Leslie made, and then Deborah, I see, wants to talk too. I mean, I think it doesn't make sense to confuse the public. I think we came a long way from the budget guidelines. It is my opinion. We also tried to soften some points that we felt you put forth, and perhaps our language wasn't, as whatever, but I would prefer to post that document, have one document out there to keep the confusion. So we have got one document to talk about. We still can talk. I think getting together, if it's possible to get together as, whatever, a group of 4 and appropriately, working through Ben, I think that's a great idea. And, but that's what I would suggest. Deborah, you had comments there, and
Yeah, I just, I think that we should, I think we should just take this offline and decide next steps.
So,
I'm always flexible. I'm always willing to have conversation. I don't want to feel that by voting now means I'm not flexible. I just don't want to be threatened. And it feels a little bit like a threat, but that's why we could vote, or we could just take it offline and figure out what the next best step is.
So to put this into a parliamentary context, I'm going to make a motion to continue this item to the next meeting of the Budget Committee. If the chair wishes to have a special meeting, she can notice it and let the continuance be to that. If not, let it be to whatever's the next regular meeting of the Budget Committee that deals with this item, and we can move on with the agenda if it's the second and if it's supported by a majority.
So may I, is anyone going to second that? But can I ask a question about that?
Yes, sure.
Should I ask it before it's seconded? I don't want to.
I second the motion.
Okay. So Jeff, because, I have some experience, on the law committee. When we continue a meeting, I just want to make sure I understand. I don't think we then notice the next meeting as a special meeting. I think we then notice it as a continuance of the October 13th meeting. But I just want to make sure that I'm not, butting against FOI or Robert's rules here. So if you could just take your legal background and elaborate a little bit.
I'm not continuing the meeting. I'm taking the item and I'm making a motion that the item, the discussion and vote on guidelines be continued to the next meeting of the Budget Committee. If the chair then wishes to schedule a special meeting, placing it on the agenda, that would be when we would consider it. But failing that, by continuing it to a designated date, it places it on the agenda of that meeting, which would be the next regular meeting of the Budget Committee in November. I could look up if you want to see what date that is.
No. Well, that, just that reminds me that we need to tell the public before we adjourn this meeting, that the next regularly scheduled meeting is November 9th, but while it was posted
For
to
11.
be 11 o'clock, it's really 10:30. It was changed and that didn't make the this particular agenda. So it's 10:30 on the 9th. But I think we will see what else we can do before then.
So there's a motion before us, seconded, to continue this item to the November 9th meeting of the Budget Committee.
No, you said
No.
just to the next meeting, the
To
next
the next
meeting.
If there's a special meeting that lists this item on the agenda, then let the continuance be to that. I'm not trying to force delay here.
Okay, thank you, John. So, should we take a vote? You want to, Deborah, are you prepared to vote on this?
That's fine.
And I vote affirmatively, so it's 4-0-0. Jeff, you make sure that, when we put together that, it's acceptable to what you wanted.
There was a request before us from Mrs. Moriarty of the documents to be exhibited with the call, with the agenda for that meeting whenever it comes up. Can we address that?
I'm sorry, you want to talk about that now? Or just make sure, what, I think we can do that, in preparation for that meeting. I don't think we need to discuss that now, do we? Is that what I'm not sure what you're asking, Jeff.
I don't want to speak for Mrs. Moriarty, but my thinking was that whatever seemed to be the working drafts of each side, so to speak, let both be exhibited with the call for that meeting. If we're going to have a work session before then, maybe we'll only have one draft before us. That'll be that which we agreed upon at our conversation at some point. But failing that, let there be before us both drafts. I think from what I'm seeing, Mrs. Moriarty and I seem to be able to agree on a draft, and it appears to me that Mrs. Tarkington and Mrs. Hess seem to be able to agree on a draft. It sounds to me like I'm going to have 2 drafts, not 4 or 3 or 5. But I think we'd like to see, like the public to be able to see the framework of a discussion.
So Jeff, I think that would really, I now come into Deborah's corner on this one. I think that would really back us into a corner. We came up with a budget that originally we thought was being, realistic, taking what we knew at that particular time. Now it's like a month ago, really, at least, in putting that into a framework. Then there was a response, that we got from Ms. Moriarty in writing, okay? And that came in last night. So I do think that, if that's going to be it, then we need to go back to our original. But quite frankly, we've come a long way, guys. So let's talk about what the attachments are offline, and let's not have a problem on this particular point. So do I have a motion to approve the BET Budget Committee meeting minutes of September 15th?
So moved.
Deborah, second to that motion? Is there a second to Deborah's motion to approve the minutes of the September 15th meeting?
I'll second.
Okay, Deborah Hess moved, Leslie Moriarty second. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous,
Leslie,
4-0.
I just had a question for Jeff. The motion that you made to continue the meeting, is it just to continue the discussion approval of the guidelines till the next Budget Committee meeting?
Yes, whenever that is, be it the regular
Whatever that
meeting.
is. Okay.
Thank you.
So again, the next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, November
9th,
9th at 10:30 a.m.
you know, which is a change from what's so far published publicly.
Right, we did change that last week and it didn't make this agenda. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Roland,
Okay.
Yes,
you still there? Roland,
Yes.
are you taking charge of the everything calendar in the interim?
yeah, I can do that.
So maybe you should reflect that 10:30 change.
I will.
And yeah, just that. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Roland. I'm sorry what all you have to do.
Are we done? I'm going to stop recording.
We're all done. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yes, we're done. Thank you so much. Thank you.